This is Christopher Moldong of Chris's Storytelling Corner. Today I'm going to do a movie review for Disney's A Wrinkle in Time. Next time I'll have a manga review for Skip Beat Volume 17 and 18, a reading of my fantasy short story The Witch's Origin, and a journal of my time at WonderCon. Check out my Twitter page and author's Facebook page. Links to all these will be provided on the description. I'd really like to hear from you guys as well, so leave any comments. Make sure to subscribe and share this channel as well. The way that this is going to work is that I'm going to give a detailed recap of A Wrinkle in Time, and just to tell you that I will be giving out spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, and if you don't want to know like what happens in the movie, just to tell you, I'm going to give out a whole bunch of spoilers. I'm just going to recap the whole movie. um, After that, I will give my thoughts on the movie, talking about the actual movie itself, characters, and whatnot. As far as an initial grade goes, I am going to give this one a C plus. And if you want to know why, just stay for my thoughts. So let's recap A Wrinkle in Time. So Meg Murray's classmates and teachers see her as a troublesome and stubborn student. Her family knows that she is emotionally immature, but also sees her capable of doing great things. The family includes her scientist mother, her missing scientist father, and her brother Charles Wallace Murphy, who they keep calling Charles Wallace. So Meg is bullied at school by Veronica Wiley. Her adopted brother Charles Wallace tries to help her, but only gets her more bullied. Veronica says something mean to Meg, and Meg throws a ball at her face. Meg then gets sent to the principal's office, but then abruptly leaves and goes back home. So back at home, Meg's mother talks with Meg, but then they suddenly get a visit by Mrs. Whatsit. Charles Wallace is really cool with Mrs. Whatsit, and in the course of the conversation, Mrs. Whatsit casually mentions there is such a thing as a tesseract to the mother, Dr. Murphy. Then Mrs. Whatsit leaves. The following afternoon, Meg and Charles Wallace encounter Meg's schoolmate Calvin O'Keefe. They then go to visit an old haunted house near town, which Charles Wallace already knows is the home of Mrs. Who. They go talk to Mrs. Who. Calvin meets her, Meg meets her, and Charles Wallace meets her as well, and they talk briefly. They then go back home, and in their backyard, they encounter Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch, played by Oprah Winfrey. Mrs. Witch promises that she and her friends will help Meg find and rescue her father. So Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch turn out to be supernatural beings who transport Meg, Charles Wallace, and Calvin O'Keefe through the universe by means of tesseract. Their first stop is the planet Uriel, and Mrs. Whatsit transforms into a stingray-like being, and the kids fly on her back. They actually talk to these flower beings, and they saw Meg's father, and they tell her he went a certain direction, and that's where they're going. However, they run into this black thing, which is like essentially like the personification of evil, and it's called the It. The children are then taken. Um, they then avoid the It, and the children are then taken elsewhere to visit a man who is a medium, and he's the happy medium. However, Meg is totally imbalanced, and um, Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch kind of decide to test her back to Earth to kind of regroup. However, in their attempt to return back to Earth, the children and the three beings travel to the dark planet Chemazotz, which is taken over by the It. Pretty much Meg willed them to go there as a tessered because she's so determined to find her father. There, the children depart from the three because they're weakening, but they each give Meg a gift. One is glasses, the other, Mrs. Whatsit, gives her her faults, and Mrs. Witch gives her, I think, courage. I'm kind of going on my head right now. On this planet, Meg's father is trapped there. So they go to this cul-de-sac with these houses, and they find out all the inhabitants behave in this really mechanical way. You see these kids in the driveway bouncing a ball at the same time. Their mother, their mothers at the same time get their kids, and one mother tries to ask them if they want to eat, and they refuse. They were told earlier by, I believe, Mrs. Witch, not to get separated. Suddenly, the place becomes a beach, and this red eyed man claims to know the whereabouts of their father and takes Charles Wallace away. The thing is that the red eyed man was testing Charles Wallace through sandwiches of all things because Calvin was hungry. He's given a sandwich, and it tastes fine. But Charles Wallace eats a sandwich, and he can tell that it's sand. And Meg does not eat a sandwich. So they chase after the red-eyed man, and they end up in this one like white room. Turns out that the man was just a marionette, while Charles Wallace is pretty much taken over by the it. He has apparently found his full potential at this point. Meg uses the glasses and finds a stairway. She walks up the stairway into a room where her father is, and they reunite. However, Charles Wallace takes them all away, and their dad, his name's Dr. Alex Murray, tries to pretty much sacrifice himself to save his children. However, Meg doesn't allow it, and Charles Wallace takes Meg to the place where the it is held, like the brain of the it. They pretty much fight, but it's not really like fisticuffs or anything like that. It's pretty much Charles Wallace having his way with Meg, using his newfound abilities. But Meg admits to her faults given to her by Mrs. Whatsit and keeps telling Charles Wallace how much she loves him. Charles Wallace is removed from the It's control, and then light appears. Then the three Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch then appear and tell Meg to test her back to Earth, which she does. They all return back home, and the parents are reunited back together. Calvin decides to talk to his father and leaves. One of the backstories with Calvin is that you see it in a flashback, in a flashback, where his father doesn't really approve of him. Um, Pretty much like he only gets B's in his grades, and his father is like really disappointed in Calvin and whatnot. The movie then pretty much just ends on this happy note. The family's all together and whatnot. So, before we get into my thoughts on the movie, I'd like to plug my author's website at www.chrismondon.com, and you can read a new blog post every week on there. I post a new one every Sunday. Also, do you like children's books? Like A Wrinkle in Time? How about fantasy, adventure, action, new worlds, quirky characters? Then buy my book, The Mustard Prince in the Convent Kingdom, for just $4.99 via ebook on Amazon.com or on my author's website. Links to buy it will be provided on the page description. So, on to my thoughts on the movie. So, I'll start with the actual movie itself. I usually start with characters, but I'm going to actually go with my overall thoughts on the movie. I said that it's a C+. I kind of have some reasons for this. I'll say this right now. There's nothing wrong with the movie, per se. Characters are fine. Visually speaking, it's fine. It's actually really, visually appealing. It keeps your interest just enough. There was a critic. I was reading some reviews, and I think this one critic pretty much mirrors my feelings as well. This guy named Alex Hudson from Exclaim. He gave the film a 5 out of 10, saying that it felt like a missed opportunity rather than a family classic. All we get is a perfectly fine kids movie. And that's my feelings as well, where it's just kind of like, it just missed a couple beats to me. I'll explain that too. It is a perfectly fine kids movie. I think one of the biggest problems is that I think they tried to be too much at once, but didn't necessarily have something of a singular focus per se. It is an adventure, but it's also like a family drama, and It's also a bit of science. I mean, it's a bit of everything, but it doesn't dwell on any one of those aspects um, as heavily as maybe it should, or maybe it just didn't have enough time to. So, like I said, in that sense, it just tried to be a little too ambitious, putting in a little too much into everything. The other problem is I'll use like Charles Murphy for or Charles Wallace for example, where it's just kind of like Charles Wallace. He's a smart, prodigious kid. Everyone knows he's some child prodigy. Loves his sister, and you get a feeling that there's like this feeling, like you know, he's a bit lonely and abandoned, but it's not quite there. And by the time he gets taken over by the id, it's like I have found my potential. So let's just say there were like three steps here. You had point A, the introduction, point B, the body, and point C, which is like the conclusion, right? Pretty much, I think one of the biggest problems with the movie is that a lot of times they went from point A to point C a lot of times and just missed point B entirely. It's like I understand the motivations for a lot of these characters, and I'm glad that they tried to get a backstory with a lot of these characters and whatnot. However, they kind of just reached a conclusion without really dwelling on it, dwelling upon these characters' motivations and whatnot. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, I reached my potential. It's like, oh, okay, we didn't really see the journey of you struggling. There wasn't like this huge journey of struggle. It's like, okay, there's something said here, a flashback there that kind of hints at your struggle, but not really that, but it doesn't dwell on it enough. Now you can have it, there's the argument you can have it a little too much. You can dwell on things a bit too much. In this case, it's kind of, I do feel that like the body, the real meat and potatoes of a lot of motivations and whatnot. What makes these characters tick is just kind of gone. There are no twins. I read the book way back. I remember there were twins. They didn't explain Mrs. Whatsit's backstory. I think she's a star that exploded and sacrificed herself. That's not explained in the movie as well. There's just no backstory on like Mrs. Who, Mrs. Witch, Mrs. Whatsit, or anything like that. They're just kind of there. Um, Visually speaking, it's great. It's very colorful. It's a very colorful movie. Thematically, like I said, they really dwell into family. Some issues of abandonment and whatnot, and loneliness, and like just kind of who you are. So they dwell on that a bit, you know. Um, but yeah, let me get to some of the characters too. So Storm Reed plays Meg Murray, and I think Meg Murray is one of the more fleshed out characters. I think one of the biggest problems with the movie, I would say, is that it really beats you over the head with what's going on with her sometimes instead of organically happening. It's just kind of like, we got it. Her father has been gone for 4 years. You keep beating us over the head with this point, and she's a bit emotionally like unattached to like everything because of it. And it's like, I think that's one of the biggest problems too. Like I said, it's just a time. Maybe it's just they didn't have enough time, but they couldn't. They tried to do a lot at once, and so what ends up happening is they have to kind of like really tell you, okay, like her dad's gone. She's you know kind of an emotional mess because of it. She doesn't trust anyone because of it. Here it is. It's not something it's not organic enough, I guess, in that sense, in my opinion. You know, I think she plays the role well. I think she's a strong character. She does overcome the odds, especially near the end. She's a bit untrusting at first, but I think slowly but surely she's once again like by the end of the movie, like I didn't really get that she went totally full circle per se. Like, I don't really know if she's still gonna be kind of that same student or whatnot, or if she's gonna be a happier person by the end of it all. She kind of just saves her brother, Charles Wallace. So that, like I said, there isn't. I don't really know if there's something of a full circle thing. A lot of movies I like, Disney wise or like kids movies wise, there's a sense of like a full circle thing, where it's like Hook. Okay, Robin Williams plays Peter Pan, who's older, he's a lawyer, finds his kid again, becomes Peter Pan, and it kind of rescues his kids and is that adult again, but still now he got that childhood, that childlikeness back. There's like this full circle thing that kind of happened with him. I I don't really know if I got that with Meg. I don't really know if it really just came full circle per se. And like I said, that there there's nothing like I said, there's nothing wrong with the movie per se, but it really is a case of like there could have just been more to it, more so than anything else. Like I said, she's fleshed out enough. You understand her motivations. You understand she wants to find her father and whatnot. Understand she's bullied and whatnot. But like I said, I don't really. By the end of the movie, I don't really know if it came full circle with her. If anything, I think everything kind of came full circle with the parents. To be honest with you. Chris Pine was trying to shake the universe's hand. And in order to do so, he sacrificed 4 years of his life, of not being with his children in order to do that. And, the mom's just trying, is still around. She's struggling a bit here and there. And by the end of the movie, he comes back. And I felt that there was a little more that at least felt a little more finished with the parents. Maybe we needed to see Meg in school. Maybe I mean Meg kind of she waves at Veronica, which is kind of nice, I suppose. But like even Veronica has just a flashback about her. You can kind of tell that she has some sort of like self-image issues and whatnot. And like once again, it's like they kind of get it, but they don't really like. They'll show a thing here or there that kind of shows that she went full circle. Maybe Meg's gonna be nicer. Maybe Veronica and Meg are gonna be friends again. But like, it never just felt like enough. Where like, okay, they really went full circle. Meg completed the journey. This is great. Same with Calvin. It's like you kind of meet Calvin just very suddenly. And then what happens by the end of it, you see a flashback with him. His dad is kind of lecturing him and whatnot. By the end of the movie, it's just he was just kind of there the whole time. And then by the end of the movie, it's like, oh, I'm going to talk to my dad. And it's like, okay, I get, once again. But throughout the whole movie, there wasn't like this big struggle per se. They say, oh, he's just being nice as if it's some sort of facade, like, oh, Mr. Nice Guy Calvin. They say it, and once again, it's that idea of like they beat you over the head with it in a sense. They say it in this a really powerful way, or try to, but it's not like a constant thing throughout the movie. Like Charles Wallace mentioned it, when he was like pointing out the faults in Calvin, but it's like it didn't have that big effect because it's not something that we journeyed through per se. So by the time it reached the end, it's like, okay, I understand his motivations, I understand this kid a little more. I understand what he's doing by the end of the movie, fine, but like I just like I said, the payoff wasn't as powerful as I think it could be because I think they're trying to tackle too much. Um, The other thing is, I know Meg and Calvin, there's kind of hints of romance between the two. It wasn't really there by the end. They do give a hug, but otherwise, there wasn't much else there. I like Mrs. Whatsit. I thought she was cool. You know, the misses are all very eccentric. Mrs. Whatsit most um, was the most like eccentric. Um, she's played by Reese Witherspoon. Mindy Kaling, is it Kaling? I think it's Kaling, played Mrs. Who. She had some dialogue. She tried to be profound sometimes, with like, oh, she says something that someone else said and whatnot. But like, once again, I don't really think she did much, Mrs. Who. Mrs. Witch was kind of like a little more omnipotent. She was like the most powerful. She came across like the most powerful of the three. Um, she came across like Oprah, pretty much in a sense. Um, and it actually fits her role pretty well. We saw the happy medium. He was Zach Galifianakis. He was eccentric as well. You didn't get to see a lot of him though, but like he is an eccentric character. Royanne Blanchard played Veronica. I liked her character a lot, actually. I think that they could have probably even done a little more with her. Like they you kind of got her motivation. You kind of understand why she is the way she is. By the end of the movie, she just kind of waves at like Meg, and it's like I guess they're friends now. I don't really know. So, um, but yeah, like I said, I think that was the thing with the movie. I like the characters enough, but that's the problem. It's like I like them enough, but they're not ones that I'm gonna truly be like, oh my god, remember, like, like some prolific character or something like that. It's like wow. I think that's the thing with the whole movie in a sense. I feel like I'm being very negative about the movie. Like I said, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the movie, but like I think it was rather just good, but not, it missed a couple beats and went from A to C a lot of times that stopped it from being great. Um, so yeah, I like the themes. The theme of family, some levels of loneliness, abandonment, finding of the self. Once again, they tackle it a bit, but once again, then they're having this big journey, and then they're having this big like pseudo fight scene near the end that kind of talks about it, but doesn't quite hits it the nail on the head per se. So that's all for today. If you like this, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment to this channel. Thank you for listening to this movie review. Next time, I will have a manga review for Skip Beat Volume 17 and 18, a reading of my fantasy short story, The Witch's Origin, and a journal for my time at WonderCon. Thank you, and until next time.